it's the way it stacks emails up, because Andrew sent his email, didn't he, saying, I'm not going to be there, Dean. So I thought, well, all right, fine. I know he's not there. So I deleted it. Then, of course, I realised it's attached all the other ruddy emails to it.
There you go. And then gallery.
Okay.
There you go.
Right.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Can you hear me, Moriarty?
It's lovely. It's lovely to hear you taking instructions properly.
This is exactly. Yeah.
He has
I
to
wouldn't get fed if I didn't.
Gene, me.
Hmm.
No.
Sorry. Ray's going to be a few minutes late. It says start without him. I know, Linda, you said you might have to disappear halfway through. That's fine.
I'm going to have to do the same, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's fine.
Have you picked the right subject, Dean? You're not holding their attention for long.
They don't fancy SLR history. Oh dear. How's everybody anyway?
Hey, okay.
Yeah. Bored?
Oh yeah, I'm starting. I've had enough of TV to last me 1,000 lifetimes. We've been vaccinated yet?
No,
No.
due second or third week of February, I'm told.
Okay.
As long as you don't get in front of me.
It's whoever runs the fastest, I think.
No, I'm still quite young.
Oh.
I'm over 70, but I'm at the bottom end of it. So,
Yeah. Well, really, I mean, if those just over 70 get dropped off the list, it's just one of those things, isn't it?
Well, I'm younger than him.
Actually, it affects me as well. I'm only just 70, but
Yeah.
well, it's you have to accept it, don't you? When you're young like this.
young and sprightly.
Yeah, well, that's going a bit too far.
Goodness me. I don't know. Well, when we first had ours, it was mid-December we had our first vaccination, and we kept it quiet for a good month or so because there weren't mass vaccinations about. And then we did start telling people, "Oh, we've had the vaccinations." We had a mixture of reactions. Some people were really pleased and happy about it, and it's starting to get rolled out, and some were a bit off, So unless we know people well, we tend not to tell them at the minute. We keep it quiet.
Well, it's interesting actually. When we had a sort of well, some of the people here were there, a virtual sort of cheesy, whiny evening for the Gardens and Allotments Association, and when I had an email from somebody afterwards, he said, "It's interesting, isn't it, that the major topic of conversation is who's had a vaccination."
Yeah. Yeah.
bit different from previous years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit odd.
But they are ploughing on, aren't they? They've obviously crossed the 10 million today.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yes.
So we're going to get there in the end.
they're doing really well compared to most countries.
Yeah.
I mean, Israel, they're in some sort of trial with the drug companies, aren't they? That's why they've done so much.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And I can't remember what it was, but it was. I think it's an antibody trial, but I can't remember. But I know there's a trial going on, and they're doing it in Israel. So that's why Israel are doing so well. I don't know.
But logistically, it's got to be a lot easier for them, isn't it? It's a smaller country, a smaller population, and they've got this huge sort of civil military organisation. So I just suspect it's very disciplined at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if it's compulsory.
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah, it should be really, shouldn't it? To be honest.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you see that thing on the news, I think this afternoon, in Pakistan, in certain areas, they've murdered the people, the doctors going out there to give the vaccinations.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
I mean, it's really hard rules there, isn't it?
yeah.
It's bonkers. Yeah, we're doing pretty well. Give it a minute or
Are you
two.
enjoying that, Gene?
Oh dear. Right. Okay. So what should we do? Shall I just? Oh, hang on. Ray. I'll wait for Ray to join and then.
Here he
Oh,
is.
here he is.
There he is.
Hello.
Oh.
Sorry I'm late, just getting Heather set up on the Witchwood post. She wants to watch this Witchwood TV thing that's on at the moment.
Oh, yes, yeah.
It's an interview with the doctors, a couple of the doctors at the surgery.
Oh. Okay. That's cool.
Well, they are going to record it, aren't they? So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
I'm assuming that most of us haven't really done very much photography-wise this last
No.
month. I'm going to skip it.
Actually, strangely enough, yeah, you're absolutely right in essence. Although I spent a cool 5 hours outside on what can only be described as a frosty and challenging night, and I proved to myself that piss poor preparation gives you very poor pictures.
Yes.
Having spent all that time, basically, I just got a load of rubbish, and everything covered in frost, including me. It was nice being out there, you know. It was very pleasant outside looking at the stars, but the end results of my efforts wasn't exactly impressive.
Okay. All right. Shall I crack on then?
Yeah.
Probably got. No, come on. Go and bug somebody else. There we go. Right. Now, this has to be the driest title I've ever come up with. This.
We'll take some beating, I have to say.
Commit that to memory.
Yeah, I'll be testing you on it later. So the idea of this, whether it's going to work or not, I don't know, it is to look through the development of the 35mm SLR and look at those things that are on current cameras that maybe we don't know about. And then kind of it might enhance your experience of using your camera, who knows. This is one camera after another, I should warn you, because it's kind of like, well, you'll see as we go along. I'll try to break it up a little bit, because it is kind of, you know, in 19 so-and-so this happened, and then it's a bit like that. But hopefully you'll enjoy it. Let's see. Okay, so we get the kind of the prehistory out of the way first, really. And this is what we want to try and do, talk about the bones of the modern camera. You know, everything's done automatically, and it's so seamless and quick and behind the scenes these days that we don't really often understand what actually is going on. And that's kind of the objective of this. The early history of photography, well, you know, we've been through most of this before, so I'll whip through it. There was the camera obscura in the 7th century, and then this Frenchman, Louis Daguerre, he produced the first camera, or I should say production camera. There weren't very many of them. They were massive, great big wooden things on huge tripods. They're all in museums. There aren't many left, I don't think. That was in 1839. And then in 1861, there's the first SLR patent. And it was actually this guy, Kelvin Ray Smith, who made the first actual SLR. But SLRs then were not what you might imagine they were. They certainly weren't like these modern, you know, technological marvels that we have. This is probably a bit more like it. Down here is very frustrating, infuriating things to use. So there were, you know, big wooden boxes, your shutter with the lens cap, you know, and they were large format, so they had big glass plates or the other media at the back to record the image. exposures were several minutes long. The mirror, because SLR is the thing that makes it a mirror, an SLR is the reflex mirror that moves out of the way, so that you can look at the image, you can look at the subject without exposing the recording device, the film or the glass or whatever it is. And you used to have to manually move the mirror up and down. The sensitivity of your plate really depended on how much chemical you put on it, I suppose. You know, they used to make their own. Later on, it obviously got standardized. There were no light meters, or if, you know, certainly not on the cameras anyway, there were sort of separate light meters. All the images were inverted, and they were inverted kind of on the horizontal and laterally. So if something was moving towards the top right of your shot, in the viewfinder, what passed the viewfinder, the ground glass screen as it was then, it would be going bottom left. So, you know, there were difficult things to use. Manual diaphragms, we'll talk a bit more about this a bit later on. This is in the lens. This is so what we call an aperture is made up of kind of three things, really. There's the hole in the middle that is the aperture itself, that the light comes through. And then there are the blades, and, you know, there's usually kind of between 6 and 10 of them, and they move in and out to form that hole in the middle. And the collective name for the blades is the diaphragm. And lenses used to be, if you changed the aperture setting on your lens, then the diaphragm would close or open to that setting. So if you set f16, the lens will close to f16. It wouldn't just wait until the shot was taken, it had to close. And what that meant, of course, was that everything went dark. You couldn't see the focus, you couldn't see to meter if you had a meter or whatever. So, you know, this was a pain in the neck if you've ever used one of these older cameras that has one of these manual diaphragm lenses. So the whole thing is a right royal pain in the you-know-what compared to...
Yeah. I just got to say, one thing you got missing out of there is the shutters, because there weren't any. The shutter was effectively a lens cap.
Yeah, that's right. It was. You took the lens cap off, and then you put it on, stop the exposure. There was no timing or anything like that. All that automation and all that kind of sophistication that we're so used to, none of that existed. And it was got wooden boxes, massive, great big things, heavy things you had to cart around, plus the glass plates. The chemicals were dangerous. Oh, cool. I mean, it was, and some of the glass plates, you only had kind of 10, 15 minutes to develop them before it kind of went off. It was not like it was today. But we're talking about the 35 millimeter SLR.
Brilliant camera, that.
And here is the first one, the 1936 Haji Koenigsegg. Now, early ones of these have this round window here, and later ones have a rectangular window. That's how you know whether it's early or late. This is the best picture I could find of an early one. You can see the waist level viewfinder. So you hold these things at your waist and look down into them onto that ground glass screen. But there's no pentaprism in one of these. The pentaprism is in a little bit of the camera that juts up where the viewfinder is. No pentaprisms yet. So this image is inverted. It's back to front and upside down. And that means if you've got a moving subject, you're going to have a hell of a job trying to track it, because it's going top right, and you can see it going top right in your viewfinder, but actually it's moving towards the bottom left, and you've got to go the opposite way to what you're looking at. And so, oh dear, talk about difficult. It was, however, the first system camera. There were a lot of lenses made for it, and including third-party ones. And that's probably why it was popular in science and medicine there. And it started, to gather popularity. There's no standard layout yet. For instance, in this one, the film goes right to left, or left to right, as we're looking at it, right to left if you're using a camera. And every camera had a different layout. So it's a bit like, I likened it to driving a car. Before, there was a Cadillac that was the first one to have kind of clutch, brake, accelerator, steering wheel, gear lever, and handbrake. And then everybody followed suit. And so you can get in a car and you know what to expect, don't you? You can drive any car because they're all the same. But that wasn't always the case. And that's the same with cameras. The layout was all different, different things in different places. But here's the first one, the Haji Kind Exactor. 1936, that's not that long ago, is it? It's just a bit pre-war. Now, the next major step, you'll notice, is 11 years later, 1947. So, and you kind of can understand that, because in between there's the Second World War, and all these camera manufacturers, they're busy making, I don't know, bomb sights and binoculars and all sorts of stuff. So it wasn't until after the war they kind of revisited camera development. And our next camera is this one, the 1947 Gamma Duflex. And I know what you're thinking. That does not look like an SLR. That looks like a rangefinder. But trust me, it's got a mirror. And the reason I know this is because it was the first to have an instant return mirror. So remember I said that you used to have to flip the mirror up and down manually. So you'd have mirror blackout. You flip the mirror up, take the picture, you wouldn't be able to see the thing in the viewfinder. Then you flip it back down again, and the whole thing was a bit of a, palaver. This camera had the kind of mirror we're used to today, where it's cocked with when you wind the film on, and it flips up and down automatically, an instant return mirror. And that was 1947. Oh, cool. Goodness me. Mirror blackout was reduced to 1/8 of a second. It also had a metal focal plane shutter. And before this camera, shutters were either leaf shutters in the lens, and the shutter release would be on the lens somewhere as well, usually. Or they'd have a kind of fabric shutter on rollers. So you'd have it would wind between the two spindles either side. And of course that would stretch, and it limited the shutter speed that you could get and so on. But this one had a thin metal, instead of the fabric roller shutter, it had a metal one that rolled between two spools. Still a problem, and I'll explain why it's a problem later on when we talk about, the modern shutters and why they were developed. But this one was the first one to have a metal shutter. And there's a step towards a pentaprism. It's not the first pentaprism, though. We'll see that in a minute. One of my favourite cameras is coming up next. Very unreliable, as a lot of these cutting edge cameras were, actually. A lot of them were kind of unreliable and didn't work very well, especially to start with. And here's one of my favourite cameras of all time. Look at it. It's just gorgeous. It's beautifully made. So if you want to buy one of these, by the way, it's 1947. It's Italian, the Rectiflex, made in Italy. And it's like a little work of art. But they're a lot of money these days to buy. But this has a pentaprism. So this is the first camera that had a pentaprism in 1947. And so now the subject is the right way up. If you're going to track movement, that's easy. You just follow it in the viewfinder like we would today. The first ones of these, if you orientated it portrait style, so you turn the camera on its end, the image went upside down again, which was a bit of a problem. But they fixed that about a year later. It was all sorted. Oh, look at it. It looks like look at that, how it's milled, and it's just beautifully done. Even around the shutter release. All of these things. Okay, so that's 1947, the first pentaprism. We're talking about the basic building blocks, aren't we? So this camera doesn't have any innovations on it at all. It doesn't even have a pentaprism. Look, it's just an eye-level finder on a ground glass screen. sorry, a waist level finder. But what's important about this camera is who made it and where it was made. This is made by the Asahi Optical Company. Their brand is still around today. All will become clear in a little bit.
So,
Yeah, these days only people with strange accents buy them. But they're a very, very famous brand, and they'll crop up time and again through their presentation with one innovation or another. But the thing about this is the first Japanese SLR, first Japanese one in 1952. And there's no need to worry. Don't panic. They'll never amount to anything, these Japanese manufacturers.
yeah, right.
Okay. Aha. Okay. So this one. Now I nearly didn't put this one in because of the little anecdote I'm going to tell you in a minute. But it does have a couple of innovations. It has a breech lock lens mount. So in other words, you put the lens on like you do today. You put it on, turn, and it locks. And it had. Oh, excuse me. It had the first motor drive. It's a clockwork affair. You have to wind it up, and then you just keep pressing. And you could put this. You could take the back off and put this affair on the back. And obviously, you could get a lot of film in one of these, and it would wind onto the other one. But the real reason I put this in there is to do with Star Wars. The original Star Wars film, what we would call now Star Wars 4. A New Hope, but the one that was made first, that was made on a real budget, only £18 million or so. It was made in Britain, and so the props people were British as well. And because they didn't have much money, they had to go looking for stuff for the film wherever they could get it, as cheap as they could. So, like the top of R2D2, for instance, that dome is the parabolic mirror from one of the lights that was knocking around the studio. Took the glass out and just used the metal bit. And so one of these prop guys goes into a camera shop, and I don't know if you remember the old flash brackets. They used to sit just like this bracket did, but they'd go a bit further over and there'd be an upright and the flash would sit up. Yeah. And then the handle would look like this, but it'd just be a little bit further over there. Well, they were going out of fashion then. And in a box under one of the bottom shelves in this camera shop were some of these flash brackets. And this props guy spies these flash brackets and he's looking at this part in particular, and it's got, a few switches and knobs and things on it. And he thinks, ooh, they look handy. And he takes them back to the studio, and what they used them for was the handles for the lightsabers. That's what they are, the handles to flash brackets. So there you go. Bit of useless information. Now, notice so far there's no way of metering. You have to have a separate meter. And the first camera with a meter was this, the Zeiss Icon Contact C in 56. And you can see what they've done. You flip up this little window here, and underneath is the glass that lets the light in. But they've basically taken a handheld light meter, plonked it on the top of the camera. Because that's what this bit is. It's not coupled to anything. It's not connected to any of the aperture or the shutter speed. Or there's no needle or anything in the viewfinder. Nothing like that. It's just what you would do is you play around with lighting it. So you put your ISO or your ASA, as it was called then, into one of these two, and you put your shutter speed into the other one, and it'll tell you what aperture you needed, and then you'll transfer those settings to the camera. So it's uncoupled, I suppose. And the other thing to notice about this and a lot of its successes is that it's not looking through the lens. It's metering light at the camera. The ambient light at the camera. That's all it's doing. So it's not looking at the subject or through the lens at all. But this is the first time it was on a camera, and I suppose this would be the first time we had exposure compensation on a camera as well. In those days, what you would do is you obviously couldn't change the ASA of the film itself, but you could change it on the light meter. So if you wanted more exposure, you'd tell the light meter that you had a lower sensitivity film. And if you wanted less, you'd tell it you had a higher sensitivity film. That's how it works. But there you go. So so in 56, we've got this kind of handheld meter affair plonked on top of the camera. And then in this presentation, there are 4 watershed cameras. And now you know who the Asahi Optical Company are, if you haven't guessed already. They're Pentax, now owned by Ricoh, of course, but it was this company, Asahi Optical Company, before then. So these 4 watershed cameras, they're cameras that once they came out, nothing was ever the same again. It changed, everything changed. And people will debate what I should and shouldn't have included. And, you know, there are a couple that I very nearly put into this category, and I'll point those out when we get to them a bit later on. But this is the first one of our 4. And there are some innovations on this. So it's the first time we get this fold out rewind crank over here. It's the first time you've got this fast thumb wind lever that's so familiar. Before that, you just turn the dial. And it's got a micro prism focusing aid as well. But the thing about this camera is a bit like that Cadillac we mentioned earlier. This establishes the layout, the standardized layout. It's so familiar looking, this camera, because every camera after it followed the layout. And it's still there today. I mean, on this side, bear in mind there's no metering in this at all. So on this side, you basically just set the ISO on here just to remind yourself what the films are, what film you got in there. But that's where the mode dial is these days. Sometimes you'd have an option of black and white or color set over here as well, just to remind yourself, and that's where the mode dial goes. This is the shutter speed dial. Now it's the wheel, isn't it? The main control goes there. The shutter release, that goes out here these days. And this is the frame counter. I'm going to call that the information center. Now it's an LCD screen that sits there. So there are still vestiges of this camera in our modern cameras today. It's still laid out like that. Everybody followed suit. I mean, there were exceptions. There was a time when Olympus put the shutter speed down here on the lens mount and all sorts of things. But on the whole, the reason why this camera looks so familiar is because that is the standard layout, and that's the way. This was the first one to establish it.
Do you know where they got the name Pentax?
No, I don't.
They actually bought it from the East German company, because Pentax is actually a combination of pentaprism and contacts. And Asahi bought that name from, it might have been Zeiss.
Zeiss, yeah, it was Zeiss. Yeah, okay.
And it would have been round about that time, 57. That's where that name came from. It's not an original Japanese name.
This camera has, it's called the Asahi Pentax, but it has some nicknames. It's also called the Pentax, and it's also called the Asahi Pentax AP. And it's a really important camera. It's, you know, and the role of Pentax in the development of the SLR can't be understated, really. They were right at the forefront in the mechanical era. We've got a lot that we owe to Pentax. Shame they're no good these days, you know.
I shall treat that with the contempt it deserves.
All right, okay, so let's take stock. What we got? Well, we've now got a standardized layout. Thank goodness we've got an instant return mirror and a pentaprism. Everything's manual, though. There's no automation at all, so there's only full manual available on the cameras. There's no sort of semi-auto or auto modes. You're focusing manually. The diaphragm, remember we talked about that is manual, so it closes when you close the aperture. There's uncoupled metering, we've seen that, but it's not kind of connected to anything just yet. We've finally got the film going the right way, left to right if you're holding the camera. And we've got a primitive form of exposure compensation. But these cameras are, that's how they feel to use. If I've got a couple of cameras from that kind of era, and they are, oh my God, they're so different. It's really hard to explain how tricky and time consuming and frustrating it is not to be able to just go click. Because there's a whole procedure you've got to follow to take a picture. First of all, you've got to open the aperture right up, because otherwise you can't see the focus. And if it's got a meter, you can't see the meter either for cameras that are a bit later. Then you focus and you kind of roughly compose, and then you're going to meter, aren't you, one way or another, and transfer those settings to the camera. Then you've got to check that nothing's changed, and then quickly close your aperture and shoot. And it feels like it takes an absolute age. You miss things change in front of you, and you end up doing this procedure over and over and over again. And, you know, if your subject's moving, God help you. I think what they used to do, actually, I thought about this. What did they do? They must have taken moving subjects, and I think they used, they probably used hyperfocal distance. So they'd set, say, 3 or 4 meters focus on the focusing ring. So they'd focus 3 or 4 meters away. And something like F8 or F11, and that should cover, you know, what the movement of the subject. But
It used to be marked on all the lenses, though.
yeah, the depth of field would be, yeah.
So you get an idea of, you know, your hyperfocal distance.
Yeah, and they'd be much quicker at it than I'm making it sound.
The other thing then, of course, is with the shutters, you often had to cock the shutter before you actually released it.
Yeah, they were, I mean, compared to modern day cameras, it really makes you appreciate your digital camera when you pick that back up again. Because they're really hard to use, to go backwards and use them. I mean, that's all they had us to do. That's what they did. But, you know, for us, it's a real contrast. So that's where we were. Now, I forget where, so I think this camera might be Hungarian or maybe Turkish. I can't remember exactly. But that procedure that I've just described, one of the issues with it was this manual diaphragm where the aperture would close as you turn the aperture in. So if it's a bright sunny day and you want f16, you put f16, but you can't see anything out through the viewfinder because everything's gone dark because the light's coming through this tiny little hole. It's all gone kind of all dark and hazy. So this is the first camera that had an automatic diaphragm. Well, an internal one anyway. So the workings for it are all inside. There were a couple that had kind of external linkages and things, but you know, one knock or drop it and they were broken. This is the first internal one. And now the viewfinder stays bright and the aperture only closes when the shutter fires. Happy days. You can focus, compose, you can watch the subject, you can have the aperture set to what you want to use it at, and it speeds the whole thing up a lot, actually. It really does a lot. So this camera that I'd never heard of before I did this presentation.
I've never heard of that one.
Quite an important camera. It's not quite a big enough innovation to make it into the top tier. There's probably, you know, 1 or 2 below. And then this kind of clunky, complicated, expensive, complex affair comes out in 1958, the Zeiss Icon Contra X. And you can see how it's metering. It's metering through this window here. So it's still taking light that's ambient at the camera. It's not looking through the lens. Right, so it's still looking here. We're not looking through the lens yet. But it is coupled. So there's a needle in the viewfinder, and when you turn the controls, the needle moves. And it's one of these center of the needle type affairs. And this is the first time we see this coupled metering, where what you do on the camera is reflected straight away in the viewfinder. And that's quite a big step forward. It's got a couple of nicknames: Cyclops, obviously for obvious reasons. Bullseye is another one. But again, it's manual only. You can see it's more or less following the format. But this thing was expensive, and it didn't work very well, I don't think. That's 58. I mean, we're getting on a bit, and we're still, we're missing some innovations. Now, no history of the SLR would be complete without this camera, the Nikon F. There are no innovations on this. There's nothing new on it at all. But I felt I ought to mention it. So this, the F and the F2, I think, were the Nikon's only professional standard SLRs of the mechanical era. But this was rugged, reliable. This was a good little camera. I'd really like to have one of these. You could have 3 finders. So this bit comes off. This is the finder here. And it comes off, and you can have just an eye level one that doesn't meter. You can have a waist level one if you want one of those. This is called the photomic finder. This is not a 1959 finder though. That had, this finder that's on here is a through the lens viewfinder. It meters through the lens. But the early ones had a window here that let the light in, a bit like that Contorex we've just been looking at. But because it was rugged, the accessories were really good. It got its nickname during the Vietnam War. The correspondents called it the hockey puck. It was that durable. If the technology changed, you didn't need to change the whole camera. You just had to change this. So when they moved from metering at the camera with this little window to through the lens, what you did, you took off the old finder, bought a new through the lens finder, and stuck it on, and happy days, off you go. They sold 862,600 of these things. That was a lot. Typically SLR sales were 100 to 200,000, somewhere in that kind of region. So to sell that many was a hell of a lot, and it kind of opened up the market to professional photographers who were using medium format cameras before then, and amateurs alike, and it kind of expanded the range of SLRs. You can see it's got there's a mechanical linkage here, so that the finder knows what aperture you're at. The shutter speed's back here, linked to this finder as well. It's a nice thing, very nice thing. But it's 1959 now. Hopefully, so I forgot this slide was next. This is the first zoom lens, 1959. There it is, the Voigtlander Zoom R 36 to 82 mil. Looks like a push-pull affair. I think you just push this ring up, I think, to change the focal length. But there we go. Right, 1960. A lot happened in 1960. I've got 3 cameras from this year to show you. One of them is one of those watershed cameras. The first one is this Konica F, and you can see that it's still metering. There's the window for the meter, so it's still metering ambient light at the camera. It's not looking through the lens at all. But what it does have is a metal curtain shutter. So the problem with the shutters that were going from one spool to another across the front of the film was that if your subject was moving, you got distortion of the subject. So if the subject moved in the same direction as the shutter went across the film, it made the subject longer, elongated it. And if it was going against the movement of the shutter, it would compress. So you got this kind of distortion of the subject, and it also limited the shutter speeds that you could get to. This camera had the more familiar, what we're familiar with anyway, the curtain type shutter. They got two curtains, and one's in front of the film, and then when you press the shutter release, it falls out of the way, exposing the film. And then when the exposure is over, the other one comes down in front and cuts it off. So you've now got first and second curtain, or front and rear curtain, depending on which way your manufacturer calls it. And you've also got the possibility of faster shutter speed. So this is the first camera to have a 2000th of a second. It's also the first to have this quicker flash sync speed. X was the way, there were a couple of ways of syncing flashes. X was one of them. And 125th was its flash sync speed. Usually before then, it's either 30th or a 60th if you were lucky. So that's that one. That's the Konica. Here's the unreliable French Savoy Flex Automatic. And this, again, look, it's metering at the camera. It's letting light, ambient light in, so we're not looking through the lens yet. But what it does have is shutter priority. It's a mechanical system, but this is the first time you've got semi-auto. There's no aperture priority yet. That doesn't come in until 1971, believe it or not. It's 11 years later. But this one is the first example of shutter priority. It doesn't work very well. But and most cameras kind of, if they have semi-auto on them after this, you know, they're mostly shutter priority. As I said, it's unreliable. This one's had a hard life by the look of it. Now, can you see?
Certainly has, yeah.
Can you see up here this this flash? Can you see there are no electrical connections to it?
No, it's a cold shoe, isn't it?
It's a cold shoe, yeah. Most of them had them. Although the next camera we're going to look at had a hot shoe.
But that little thing down the bottom there, that's where you connect the flash into.
Yes.
Up there, yeah.
Yeah. So I think there was, I don't know what, might have been FP, the other type, X or FP, I think. I don't know what their words. Yeah, it's the kind of thing that's long gone.
Yeah.
But yeah, you used to have a cable. So
That's
you
right.
set the flash there, but it was just to hold it. And there'd be a cable that came down plugged in here. But yeah, shutter priority 1960. It doesn't seem that long ago, does it?
Really?
Depends how old you are.
Okay, so here's the second of our watershed cameras. This is a British camera, this one, the Topcon, the RE Super. And I've actually got one of these. And in fact, I brought it once to support a thing on autofocus that Chris did, I think. But it's missing a piece. There's a bit that goes on top here on this ring. There's a bayonet fitting, and the hot shoe fits on top of that. But they got lost because obviously you had to take them off every time you rewound the film, and people used to lose them. But mine's got it, luckily. Thank goodness. But this camera has TTL metering. So the meter for this camera looks through the lens. And not only is it TTL metering, it's also open aperture, just like our modern cameras are. So when this camera meters, the aperture doesn't close down so that it can get an accurate meter reading. It works it out from the reading it takes. And it's on its own that way for quite a while, actually. It takes a long time to replicate it. The meter, the actual sensor, I suppose we call it, that reads the light is on the mirror. So there are selenium filaments going down the mirror, all the way down, all the way across the mirror. And they're light sensitive, and they read the light coming through the lens. But of course, when the mirror flips up and down all the time, they break and bits fall off, and they're not very reliable. So they tend not to be accurate these days, these ones. And this was an expensive beast. This was, top of the range. But TTL metering was a big deal. There's a huge difference between metering the subject you're looking at and just the light at the camera, I mean, they can be a world apart. You haven't got to go down there and take your camera with you and measure the light down there. You can just stand here and do it, just like we do today. So TTL meter, the Topcon RE Super. Here come Pentax again. So this camera was produced in big numbers. It had a long production run, 13 years.
Yeah.
A lot of people had one of these. It was a lot cheaper than the Topcon, which was why it was so popular. And it had TTL metering, so it looked through the lens. And in this camera, it's a different type of sensor. There's CDS sensors up here looking at the focus screen. The focus screen runs down here somewhere. And so they're measuring light, and so they're not moving. And also those cadmium disulfide sensors, they're a lot cheaper. So this camera was much cheaper than the Topcon, hence its popularity. It did have a disadvantage. It had an automatic diaphragm, but if you were metering, you'd half press the shutter release like we do today, and it would start to meter, but the aperture would have to close to do that, but only while you're metering. That's called stop down metering. And that carried on for many years. You know, this camera was much copied by rivals. It was a lot more reliable than that Topcon and a lot cheaper. And so it's an important camera in SLR development because there are so many of them about. Okay, that's 64.
Look at that lens, 1.4.
Yeah, special one. Usually these Pentax ones are f2s, I think. So this must have been. It's also an SMC. Look, you see this super multi-coated. Yeah, so it's an SMC Takuma. So this is an expensive lens here. That's not.
You can still use them on modern Pentaxes.
Yeah, you can. Well, this would be. Would this be an M42?
Actually, it would, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but you can get an adapter, I think. Anyway.
Yeah, I've got one because I've got. Well, you've seen my 300mm lens.
Yeah. I enjoyed using that. But that lens, you had to. The camera fitted on, I had to use in that old frustrating way. Remember that I talked about that old procedure? I took it to Birdland, and it did really well. Took some really good shots. It's a really good lens, that one. But yeah, so. Yeah, f1.4. This didn't come with the camera. It would have come with what's called a standard lens, so 50mm f1.8. So this didn't come with it. It's been put on later. So we have got open aperture, automatic diaphragms. We've got through the lens metering, and we've got shutter priority, but they're all separate in separate systems. And what this camera does, this Konica auto reflex, it puts all those systems into one, joins them together. So this has got shutter priority as we know it today. So, you know, this would behave like a manual version of our digital SLRs. And that's, you know, it's bringing all the kind of pieces together. And I've tried to describe it up here, and it ended up as a bit of a mouthful. I mean, I'll read it to you, but so this was the first SLR with an internal automatic diaphragm, open aperture, TTL metered, semi-automatic exposure.
Yeah, of course it would.
Yeah, there we go. It's shutter priority, but modern shutter priority with apertures that don't close, viewfinders that stay bright all the time. Everything's linked to the meter, and it works just like you'd expect it to, basically. But that's the first time. 68. Goodness. Now, this is one of those. If you remember, I said there were some cameras that very nearly made it into the watershed bracket, and this is one probably of the two that I really considered putting in there as well. It's a humble brand. This is Praktika. They're an East German company, or they were, and they're entry level SLRs, and they all look like that. Literally, the only way you can tell the difference between them is the writing that's on them. They all looked exactly the same. There is a mistake in this picture with the lens. We'll come to that in a minute, because that's not the right lens for it.
No, that's not what Zenith lens.
Yeah, but there's something about the lens that it shouldn't be on there. But what this camera has is it's got 3 contacts that go around the lens mount, and they match to 3 contacts on the lens itself. And so you can send electricity through both directions to the lens. And that means that you can have an electromagnet that closes the diaphragm now, that makes the aperture. Yeah, so no mechanical linkages, it's much more reliable and it's faster. It also means that you can, the lens can tell the camera body what its aperture is. And if you can take that information plus the information from the shutter speed dial over here and whatever ASA is set in, you can work out what the meter, what the little needle in the viewfinder's got to do. But the big thing about this camera is that's been done before, but this camera doesn't do it in the mechanical way that it's been done before. This camera uses something called electronic exposure simulation, and it's on every camera. Every digital camera has it these days. When you half press your shutter release and you're in, say, aperture priority, and it tells you the aperture you've set and the ISO you've set, and it picks you a shutter speed, and nothing's happening. The viewfinder is still nice and bright, nothing's closed or anything. That is electronic exposure simulation, and this was the first camera to have it. This Praktika here, and it's a big deal because it's a big part of the way we use our cameras today, and that's why I nearly put it in the watershed category, but didn't feel it was quite in the same league as some of the innovations that we're going to see and have seen already. But the thing about this lens, by the way, is that you need a particular type of lens. You've got to have a lens that has the contacts on the back, and they were called, I think they're called electronic lenses. And it had electronic written on the front. It certainly wasn't a Zenith. It was.
I think was it Pentacon?
Yeah, yeah, it was. And so this lens, the camera it'd still work, but you didn't have that exposure simulation, or you had a mechanical stop down metering. So you needed that electronic lens that could talk to the camera. When I say talk, I don't mean talk in the way that modern cameras talk. We're talking on-off, binary signals. You've either got a signal or you haven't got a signal.
Yeah, connected.
Yeah. There's no data yet. But there is a camera that gives you data transfer. We'll come right near the end of the presentation, but we'll talk about it a bit later. But I've got one of these, and it's a joy to use.
The very first, my first SLR was a Praktika.
Yeah, they're good. They're reliable. They're absolutely dirt cheap to buy. If you want to buy a film camera and have a bit of a go, you can buy one. You can pick a Praktika up for £5. Just make sure it's got TTL metering, and off you go. They're great little things. Anyway, that's the Praktika. All right, here's aperture priority, Pentax again. The Electrospotmatic. And with what used to happen was that you didn't get aperture priority and shutter priority in the same camera, not even in the same manufacturer. If you preferred one or the other, that would determine your choice of which manufacturers you'd buy from. Yeah, they were never on the same camera. So, but here is aperture priority. In my opinion, much easier to use and shutter priority. There's not so much to think about. You don't have to worry quite so much about under and overexposure. And yet again, it's a Pentax that comes up with it. It's not the last Pentax we're going to see either. Okay. Now, we've got electronic communication now. Okay, it's a bit primitive, but we can talk to the lens. We've got electronic exposure simulation, but we've got films with fixed ISOs, and that meant that you use flash a lot, especially indoors. And the flash was a problem because you put flash gun on the camera, and you had to do a whole calculation to work out what your aperture had to be. So it's a long time. I'm not even sure I can remember how they used to work. The flash would have a guide number, and then there'd be like a dial or a table on the back.
That's
and
right.
you have to say how far away it was and what ISO you were at. There was only one shutter speed that you could choose flash at. So you didn't have to worry about that. And that'd tell you, a bit like cross-referencing on a map, what your aperture had to be. And it was a right faff. And
Yeah, it also changed whether, depending on the lens that you were using, you could change it from telephoto to normal to wide angle. And that changed it as well. I've actually still got one of these old flashes. It's got that on it.
It's a shame we're not all together because, I've got quite a few of these cameras in my collection. And it sounds like, we could have brought the whole thing together and made it physical. Here it is. Have a look at it, but we can't do that just yet. But what this camera does, this camera meters the flash. So it's got two sensors that look at the film, and they're measuring the light that's reflected off the film as you're taking the shot. And then when it gets to a certain amount, it cuts the flash off. So you've got flash metering in Olympus OM2. And you can see, those Olympuses you see these days, don't they look like this? But they're beautiful cameras, these old Olympuses are. The predecessor to this, because this is the professional one, the OM1, the first one, I think that's maybe one of the prettiest cameras ever built. It's gorgeous. But there we go. So flash meters. So now we've got kind of electronic communication going everywhere. But the camera itself is still mechanical. Okay, so here come the big boys then, I guess. By this time, Canon are the biggest camera manufacturer in the world by 1976. Even today, they still are. That Canon have 45% of the camera market. That's more than Nikon, Sony, and Fuji put together. So, Canon are a big deal. And there are various reasons for it. And some of them might be apparent when we're talking about this camera. And Canon's ethos is cutting edge technology at an affordable price. And that's how the whole thing started. The guy who founded Canon took a Leica. He couldn't understand why it was so expensive. So he took it apart, expecting to see precious materials and fine engineering, and there wasn't any. And so he started Canon to make cameras that were as good as Leica, but cheaper. And this camera is no exception. In fact, it kind of epitomizes the ethos, really. Now, up until now, every camera is researched and developed independently. And Canon decided that that's an expensive way to go about things. So what they did, they went to a modular approach. So this camera body is shared all the way across the Canon range. The shutter's shared. The lens mount is shared. All you've got to do, really, to make one Canon into a different one is change the top plate and take out a few bits of the interior, which are also modular, and slot in the different ones that you need. And what that means is that they spread the R&D and the tooling and the manufacturing costs across the whole range, rather than just one camera having to take the whole burden. So this camera was quite a bit cheaper than its rivals. It also had the top plate here looks like it's metal, doesn't it? And every camera before it, it was metal, but this isn't. This is plastic, which is cheaper and lighter as well. But those aren't the big things about this camera. The big thing about it is that this is the first camera to have a CPU. So it's a computer, basically, this Canon. So not only is it cheaper than its rivals, it's also much more advanced than its rivals. Canon ran this massive advertising campaign. And in the days when it was, average sales of SLRs, as I said, were about 100 to 200,000, Canon sold 5 million of these things. And then when Auto came out, they made the AE1 program, because it was called program mode back then, and they sold another 4 million of those. And it kind of cemented the brand, really. And they kind of carried on being market leaders ever since, apart from a little hiccup in the 80s that we'll come to later. I don't know what they were up to. I think they'd all fallen asleep on the job. But this is the other camera that I thought might have been in the watershed section because it's the first CPU. It changed the way cameras were manufactured and things. But this isn't a cracker. It's a good camera to use. Okay, so let's just have another think. Where are we? So we now have aperture priority and shutter priority. They're open aperture, so there's none of this sort of narrowing of the aperture and the viewfinder going dark anymore. That's gone. But you don't see them on the same camera, not even on the same manufacturers usually. But they're all manual focus. We now have electronics and computers involved. We've got things like LEDs in viewfinders. Things are getting a bit sexy. But there is a problem. And the problem is that SLRs are complicated things to use, and you need quite a bit of knowledge about what all the settings do and things. And there's a rise, an upsurge of compact cameras that just point and shoot, and they work great as well, work really well. And so SLR sales are declining. People are buying easier to use compact cameras that the whole family can use, rather than just one camera that's really tricky that nobody can use. Only one person knows how to use. So, what can be done about it? And what can be done about it is this. Now, don't look at the left-hand side of the screen. Can you look at that top plate of that Canon and tell me what the innovation is on this camera? I'll give you 30 seconds or so. What do you reckon?
Aperture and shutter priority.
Yeah, you've got aperture and shutter priority together, and you're in the right area. It's literally there somewhere.
Yeah, I had one of these, and it had you could use it fully auto if you wanted.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So you see this symbol here next to shutter priority. That is the symbol for full auto. It's on if you've got an SLR today, it's on there. It's a different color. It's green. And the reason it's green is that to get to auto, you turn this dial to shutter priority, and then you use the main wheel here. First time we saw that. And you go to one end of the shutter speeds, and then there's a green square with a white P in it for program. And that's where that green symbol comes from on your cameras. This camera has what was called PASM. It has program, which is basically full auto, aperture priority, shutter priority, and manual. And it's the first time all four of those are together, and it's the first time full auto is there. So you can turn this to full auto and hand it to your kids, and all they've got to do is focus and press the button. Well, okay, you've got to wind it on, but they're used to doing that. The other things to look at, that's that control wheel, and eventually it ends up over here. and this is difficult to use because it's got a lip underneath it, and it's quite close to the lens mount as well. It's really, it's not the easiest of wheels to use, but it's there. You've got the information centers getting bigger. Yeah, you've got a counter here, and this switches between aperture and shutter priority. This one. And here you've got, remember I said changing the ISO or ASA as they called it then, is exposure compensation. Well, this is the exposure compensation dial. So you dial in your ISO on this side, and then if you want negative exposure compensation, you go up this way, and positive you go this way. So this was I've got one of these too, as you say, Tony. So it's a really nice camera, really nice camera.
How do you switch that to manual then?
You put it on shutter priority, and you turn the lens. See how the lens is on auto?
Yeah.
You just pull the lens that way, and then you've got aperture as well.
Ah, right. Okay.
Yeah. I've likened this to HMS Victory. So this is king of the seas, right? It's bristling with armament. It's got loads of sails. It's fast, and don't mess. It's king of the seas. And we'll come back to why I've called it HMS Victory in 2 cameras' time, when my favourite SLR of all time comes. We get to that, but full auto, and it's 1978. Goodness. Okay, so the obvious thing that's missing now is autofocus. And the first autofocus camera actually is this one down here, the Konica C35AF. I brought that to Chris's presentation as well. You might have seen it. And it's point and shoot is all it is, but the lens does autofocus on its own. It works really well as well. But the first autofocus SLR is this. Pentax MEF. And it's basically, if you've ever heard of the ME Super, Pentax ME Super, this is an ME Super that's been modified and it's got some extra sensors and some extra buttons on that side.
Yeah, I've got an ME. Yeah. This
is the only autofocus lens that fits it, and it doesn't autofocus on any other lens. It's you focus using the buttons on here. It doesn't focus on the shutter release. Shutter release is there, but it focuses on the buttons that are. There's one there, and there's one on this side. It's slow. It quite often doesn't attain focus. It's heavy. To get it to the spec of the camera that I'm about to show you, you need a motor drive as well. That means that you've got 4 batteries in here. They're AAA batteries in there. You've got 4 batteries in the motor drive. They're AA. And you've got 4 button batteries in the camera. So you've got 12 batteries of 3 different types. There are 4 on-off switches. So you've got 1 here for the lens. Then you've got to switch the motor drive on. Then you've got to turn the camera on with this dial here. And then over here, there's one for the autofocus, just the other side of the viewfinder there. And that'd be all right if it was brilliant, but it isn't. It's a dog, really. It's just the wrong idea completely. But it's quite novel to use to say. It draws a lot of attention. People, want to know what it is when you're out using it. Cool. As I say, Pentax got. They were first there with autofocus. But it doesn't work properly, not really. It's not practical. Following this, there's a Nikon, and the Nikon falls into all the same traps. Yeah, so I haven't bothered with that. And with history, you struggle to find out about it. But the next camera, so this is 1981. So it's 4 years now to the next one. This Minolta is our 3rd watershed camera. And the day this camera was released, every other SLR on the market became obsolete. They were all old hat, useless old, This one has working autofocus. It works properly and it's reliable and quick. And there are lots of autofocus lenses for it. And the whole thing works off the shut release, which is now out here on top of this battery compartment. There's one set of batteries that fit in there. That's it. There's one on-off switch. You notice there's no apertures on the ring, no aperture ring on the lens. This is the aperture control here, push button. This is shutter speed over here. The information center is now an LCD screen. And if you want to change the mode, it's push button. Remember, this is where the mode dial is today. And just to add insult to injury, it's motor driven. It's got an inbuilt motor drive. So it automatically advances the film and automatically rewinds it when it's finished. This thing, I've called it the Starship Enterprise. Its competitors are that, Pentax, and HMS Victoria, the king of the seas. The problem is, this Minolta has got warp drive, torpedoes, and phasers. They didn't stand a chance. This camera, everyone is caught sleeping, and this camera makes Minolta the biggest camera manufacturer in the world. That if you were buying a new SLR in 1985, 86, and most of 87, this is what you bought. Why on earth would you buy anything else? And that's why they sold 13.5 million of these things. I swear to you, I could give you this camera, the batteries and the film. You could put the batteries in, you could put the film in, and you'd be able to use it without any instruction at all, because it works just like modern SLRs do, even down to the way the shutter release works. It's a two-stage affair. You half press it, it focuses and exposes. Press it the rest of the way, it takes the shot. Focus and recompose is born in this Minolta. This is a cracking, it's so different to everything that's gone before it. You know, it's just completely different. And it's one of those cameras that's just amazing. If you want to buy one of these, I've got a top tip for you. This plastic battery cover here reacts to the sweat and oils and things on your skin, and it discolors, it goes white. So the blacker this is, the less the camera's been used, and the more valuable the camera is too. Okay, so that's it. I mean, it's quite the camera. This it was such a step forward. So 2 years later, Canon eventually catch up, and they release the EOS lens mount. This is the first camera to have it, the 650, and now we have data transfer. We've got computerized lenses, computerized camera body, and they talk to each other like the way we would expect. Canon future-proofed this lens mount to the extent that I can use any of my current lenses on my version of this. I've got one of these, and I can just put my modern lenses on it and they work perfectly. Image stabilization works, everything just works just as it should. So data transfer is born, and now we've got one camera left. Can you guess what the innovation is? Because it's a watershed camera. And do you know what the camera is? Oh, that might be a bit of a stretch, but we might be able to guess what the innovation is.
Is it the mirrorless camera?
No, that's a bit later.
All right.
We've got a step in between. You're sort of there. It's this. So this is the Kodak digital camera system. I know it says Nikon there. What they did, they took a Nikon F3 and they took out all the film bits, put a new back on, and a load of electronics and sensor inside, and they connected it to this this thing down here, the data unit. You had to carry that with you over your shoulder. But this is the first digital SLR. It's 1.3 megapixels. Whoopie-doo, we'd say these days, but I mean, back then, that was a big deal. It had a CCD sensor. We don't use those anymore. we use, so that's a charge couple device. We use these things. We use, where's my mouse on there? We use a CMOS sensor. You're going to ask me what that stands for. Ooh.
CMOS, it stands for complementary metal oxide sensor.
Semiconductor, isn't it? Is it semiconductor?
Semiconductor, yeah.
It's
Semiconductor.
Semiconductor, is it?
So I'm glad you got the complimentary bit though, because I was struggling a bit. That first one. That came later, 2000 on the Canon D30, but this is the first digital SLR. I mean, look at it. But the point about this camera is film's dead, pretty much. You know, long live digital. And so hopefully that's kind of helped you see what happened over the years and the advances that have been made. The whole thing's kind of in this sheet. I mean, here's the Starship Enterprise we were talking about earlier on, that Minolta. And there's digital. And we've got waterproofing, image stabilization, 1995. God. There's the CMOS sensors in 2000. Live view wasn't until 2006 on Olympus. HD video, 2008. And 2010, Tony, for mirrorless.
Right.
Sony SLT Alpha. It's only been going 11 years. God. And that's it. That's the end of the presentation. Let me. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Any questions?
No.
No. Happy days.
I hear you, Gene.
You can't hear me.
Gene's trying to say something with her microphone off.
She didn't, because there's that echo. You need to sort that out, Gene. She doesn't know what it is. Oh, it doesn't work. Okay.
No, the whole history of cameras is just fascinating. There's just so many. I mean, that's just SLRs.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, you start looking at other stuff as well, like twin lens reflexes and, you know, ordinary 35mm rangefinder cameras and stuff. And there's just so many, you know.
Yeah, come on. They're fascinating, and they're nice little gadgets to play with.
Yeah.
You know, if you like that sort of thing, they're quite nice to fiddle around with.
Yeah. Now that first one you showed, that Exacta, that used to be my favourite. Not the one you showed, but the later versions, because it's sort of late 60s. The Exacta used to have they had the waist level finder, but you could change it. You know, it's interchangeable, and you could put in an eye level finder. And in fact, you could even replace the focusing screen, and you could go for, you know, the split image focusing, or just an ordinary Fresnel screen. And you could replace all of them. You could take it out and clean it easily, and stick it back in again. Because I mean, at the end of the 80s, for a couple of years, I worked in the camera shop, and the great thing was, you know, we did a really good business in secondhand stuff. And it was just fascinating every time we got in a camera that we'd never seen before. If you sat in the back of the shop, you know, playing with it, it was fantastic. You got to know all these different cameras, you know. I've forgotten half of it now because it's a long time ago.
Yeah,
but that Exacta was one of my favourites. I loved it. And then there was a smaller version, there was a slightly cheaper version called an EXA. But it was made by Exacta, but it was a smaller version. They're great cameras.
Yeah.
But I know when Dean was talking about the sort of cameras with ground screens, my very first camera, which I got secondhand at a very low price, I can understand why once I got it, was a twin lens reflex Yashica. And you looked at that by looking down into the finder on the top, and that was exactly right. Everything was completely reversed. So if you saw something, I can remember standing and getting Linda to try and take a picture of me years ago, and she slowly turned away until she was actually facing in the opposite direction, looking down at the screen, saying, "I just can't find you anywhere," because of course everything was the wrong way around.
Yeah. Well, I've actually used one of these old mahogany and brass cameras, because I picked one of those up again. It was way back. It must have been late 60s. I picked it up from somebody and I took it out to a local park. Yeah. And I set it all up. Yeah. And just as you say, it was quite a big screen on it, glass plate that you put into it. And, but it was all reversed. And of course, what you needed to do is you needed to cover it because you couldn't see in daylight unless you covered it. I didn't have a cover. All I had was a raincoat. And I remember I was standing there and I had this raincoat over my head and over the top. And you focused it by moving the bellows, in and out. And I was there for ages. And it was just a scene in the park. There was trees and all sorts of stuff. And I eventually got it there. And I came out from under this, and there's this row of people all standing there looking at me, thinking, what the hell is he doing? And I sold that for next to nothing, and I really, really regretted it afterwards.
Yeah.
I wish I kept it. It was a beautiful camera, nice mahogany finish, brass lens, brass fittings.
I was out in
Lots of
Moscow
money
and
when you sold it.
Sorry?
Did you make lots of money when you sold it?
No, I didn't. I sold it for next to nothing.
All right.
I think I just wanted rid of it at the time. Didn't think about it at the time, but now, I just wish it kept. I mean, saying that, you see these things come up there's loads of them for sale. You can't pick them up quite cheaply.
Mm.
There are certain ones that are worth a lot of money, but there's an awful lot of cheaper ones. Probably because the bellows are all perishing,
Yeah.
They're all in collections and things, aren't they?
Yeah.
Has anybody got any pictures to share?
I've got a few this time.
Nothing exciting.
Yeah, I've got some. Not many.
I'll show you what I've got.
All right.
You got screen share on? Yeah.
Yeah, I turned it on.
Right. Let's see if I can find what I've done with it. Oh, cool. No, not that. Where did I put it? I'll find it where I put it now. Photography. Oh, it'll be a slot, won't it? February 21st. There you go. Right, it's nothing awfully exciting, I'm afraid. This is just a few things. When the snow came down, I thought I'd take a few out in the garden, as you do.
Oh, they're lovely.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
that's pretty.
Yeah. What I've done with most of these is I've put a sort of white vignette on them. I think it just sets them off nicely.
How exotic.
He's been sitting there a while.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
No, as usual, I was working there, I'm wearing a path there. Because as soon as you start working in the garden, they come down. And they're in amongst your feet and everything. Looking for worms and stuff that you've unearthed, But that came out quite nicely. Yeah. This is just
Berries.
going round with my this is my 90mm Tamron macro. Yeah, that one's not very exciting.
Oh, they might ripen.
You never know. Amazing, isn't it? Amazing.
Yeah. That's quite nice, actually. I like that one.
That's good.
Back towards the house, yeah. Ruben just loved that snow. He absolutely loved it. I've seen that on Facebook. But, he just goes bananas. Right, and I've got just someone else I was trying. I went through and found some of my old slides. I always just started doing them. I don't have very many, but because I've got loads, I've got so many slides that need doing. But I've not got the right setup yet. To get them just as I want them. So I need to keep experimenting with it. You can see the focus hasn't come out too well there at the bottom, because I'm sure the original slides are much better than that. But just so you know, that's my son, and this year he'll be 41. So that's how long ago this was. You might recognise that, Dean.
That's Oban.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, what I haven't done here is say I haven't done anything with the slides. I've taken them out and photographed them. So if you look up here, you see all the marks and everything on them. So needs a bit of work doing.
It's changed a bit since then, though, Ray.
Yeah. Yeah, you see this focus is not quite right there. There's something I've not got right with this setup. I think this is Mull. I think this is over on Mull. Pretty sure it is. If I remember correctly.
I didn't go over there. That's on the list.
Right, and that's really all I've got, actually.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very good. Anybody else? Chris, you said you had some?
Yeah, I've got a few. Yeah. Right. Screen. Oh, it's different. Oh, Ross.
Yeah, you want to minimise that whole lot.
Oh. Yeah. Can you see my?
Yeah.
There's a new folder there.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lost time somehow. Anyway, I've been cataloguing a lot of my old photographs, going right back about 20 years. And I've got a collection of digital and also some scanned prints. I had a lot of slides scanned professionally, well, for want of a better word, a couple of years back, and they were okay, but they were a bit disappointing. I thought they'd be a bit better. I was just going through a thing, one or two amusing and perhaps interesting pictures popped up. And I've just got a handful of those that I put into a folder. So let's have a look. This is taken on a little Canon Ixus or something like that. Oh no, that's taken down my old Fuji phone fix. Anyway, the story behind this is why I liked it. We're on holiday in Mars Sicily, actually, and we were walking. It was a cold day, as you can see. And we stopped, I think it was a pub, or maybe it was a cafe, and we got ourselves a coffee each. And all of a sudden, this dog leapt up and sat beside me. And I think the rest of it tells the story. I had, I think in my other hand, I had a pasty or something like that.
Yeah, well, that's a clue, yeah.
I think he's looking down here. And there were two of these dogs, and they belonged to the cafe or pub owner. But it was just quite amusing. He was up on the seat and sat on the seat. And no, I took that picture. This was something I took, well, around Christmas time, as you can probably guess. And focused on the rain on the window, and we decorated the tree outside with some lights. I just thought it was a pleasing image.
Yeah,
It's quite pretty.
Yeah, it's good.
This was, I'm not sure whether I did it deliberately or whether it was a mistake, but I think I did it deliberately. Just experimenting with moving the camera around.
That's a hell of a mistake if it was a mistake.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? I think it was after about a bottle of wine. But we had some, I looked at it and I thought, oh, what on earth is that? What are we doing? And I remember doing a few things that weren't successful. But these here are each the lights on the tree. This I'm not quite sure. But these things are illuminated candy canes, which we have as a row down our lawn at Christmas. That's a bit of a car, and I'm not quite sure what this is. Maybe something to do with the neighbours, because that's some of the houses opposite. But I thought it was. This is, I can't remember what it's called. I don't know, Tony, you might know, but they're just coming out into flower, the shrub. And I thought it was quite nice. And I took this. I took it out in the dark. I was just inspired by your ring flash picture scheme. And I got a dirt cheap one. I thought I'll put it on. And it was pitch dark outside. And I thought I'll do a few pictures. And some worked well, and some didn't. But I just had it on the end of my macro lens. And I took a few of those, which I thought were quite nice. And I only noticed when I processed it earlier today, there was a lot of crap on the front of the lens. And here it must be on. Well, not the lens, because I've got a UV filter screwed on. But I'll have to have a look at it, because this can't be anything else, can it?
Yeah.
It's not floating around.
Yeah, it's on the filter. Yeah.
It's on the front of the camera. Yeah. And that's when Nora rushed out and built a snowman for the children, which has been well circulated. Again, that was done with the ring, not actually in flash mode. But I think the wall actually. Oh no, this is this goes back. I was looking at some pictures I took in. This is Bruges, Dean. I think I mentioned it to you once before. The ice exhibition they do or did every year, and it was absolutely brilliant. Oh, that's the excess. Yeah. So I just picked 2 or 3 of them out and with a process and improve them a little bit. Taking originally in JPEG, but it's surprising how much you can do with a JPEG, to be honest. That was one of the sculptures. I believe most of the sculptors come over from or go over from Britain every year. Oh, really? And they do all these things with chainsaws and hot irons, and a variety of other tools. I think. That was fantastic, actually.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. Look at that.
And that was just another sort of. I think that was a wall of ice with, a picture.
Is that just etched in the ice then?
I think that's just etched in the ice. Yeah.
Where was this, Chris?
That's in Bruges, and I know they stopped it one year, so I don't know whether they're still doing it. And probably not this year or last year or whatever. But they set up a large marquee actually in front of the station, and it's quite a big affair. And then they've got a covered area when you come out. You can have hot chocolate and other drinks and things like that. And the interesting thing is, as you come out, they hand you a tissue if you've got glasses, which is totally useless because you clean your glasses as soon as you come out. They mist over. And you clean them with a tissue and put them back on, and they just immediately mist over again. But they keep it at about -5 degrees inside, so it's not too cold. But they run it from, I don't know really, but they obviously there's an awful lot of work there. So I think they run it from beginning of December to end of January or something like that, to guess. But it's if you go to Bruges at Christmas and it's still there, it's well worth a visit.
Yeah, they've just it says it's still on. It's not on this year, or it wasn't on in 2019.
Yeah.
and 2020, but it's an annual event apparently. Oh, I like
But
Bruges.
we went 3 times, I think. It was so good. And of course, it was a different scene each year. You know, it was a different genre. And you know, that's when I used to travel up to my supplier in Germany, and we used to go to Bruges, stay overnight, and or sometimes a couple of nights, because it was one of our favourite places, which you'll certainly understand. In
Yeah, I love that. I love that city.
lovely place.
It's so easy to get to. It's only an hour from Calais,
Yeah,
and you're there, and it's just beautiful. Bruges.
yeah. Well, the longest part of the journey is from here to Calais, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And that's the last one of it, I think. But I did improve them quite a lot, so I might have another crack at the rest of them and look at a couple of other years. I took some pictures and examine them again sometime. They were, yeah, very good.
Oh,
A lot. I will stop share.
Up top.
Yeah.
okay. Anyone else got any?
Yeah, I've got 1 or 2 if I can find them. We went out in the snow, along with a lot of other people, but also I'm in a U3A photo group. And what Anthony came up with this month is you had about 10 days notice to just go out and take 4 pictures of old buildings. Now, bearing in mind all the rest of the group live in Farringdon, so they've got quite a good advantage over us. But I got a couple in there. Just share screen, is it?
Yeah.
Close that one. Oh, desktop.
Close that window.
Right. On that one. Oh, I will put it up there, haven't I? Out of the way. Get it out of the way. This is getting slower and slower, this computer.
They do that.
Need you buy another one?
Nah.
No, the high street.
Yeah, High Street, that's Sunday morning, not early. Don't do earlies anymore. But I just like the kids coming down. Oops, sorry. Yes,
Good one.
went up by James's, and I liked it in black and white.
Yeah, that looks good.
I think that's really nice.
When
You
they
put that on Facebook, didn't you?
yeah, it's SuperFX Pro, SilverFX Pro, and then back into Lightroom and did what you're telling us, Dean, about turning up the haze.
Yeah, it works well, doesn't it? That.
Yeah. That's just around the back of the church.
Yeah.
But you can see it was starting to thaw then. You can see the runs coming down the snow.
Yeah.
We're going to go towards the allotment. That's all these people coming. And just turned it into black and white. It was nothing in colour. But yes, as we started to walk back down, somebody just starting a fire. If you look at the sky there, how grey and horrible it was. And by the time we walked around to the Poplar Farm, what do they say about the sun over the righteous? But yeah.
How did that happen then?
Well, obviously, Dean is out there praying for it or something. But it's literally walking from the allotments and then down, and just the weather was starting to get a little bit better. Now, these are the 4 I took of the old buildings because we walked down to Shipton. I don't know exactly how old that varnish is. It's,
Is that by the garage?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's Flemish block, the block work. So then we went round by the station. Didn't know it was there. I just walked down to. I wanted to take some of the flour mill because that goes back to 1912. Some of it, but there's all new buildings and lorries around it. You can't see any of the old mill, but that's down there. And then we did Shipton Church.
God, you're almost in Andrew's garden.
Not quite out the path, and
It's just behind you.
yes, and then it was I had trouble getting it straight because for some reason I can't find the TS settings in that. When you're in Lightroom looking for the lens corrections, I can't find TS lenses, so I just had to go into the what do they call it, like where you straight it up automatically.
Yeah.
And then that's the back of Shipton Court.
Yeah.
Lane. So the idea is, well, Anthony gives you a topic, and you've only got about 10 days to do them in, and it's quite interesting. And you're only allowed to take 4 as well. So he's trying to get us to think rather than going out somewhere and taking 40 or 50 grab shots.
Good. Very good. Anybody else?
I've got some very mundane ones. I mean, if somebody's got something good, get on and show it in front of mine, because mine are very mundane. They can wait.
Okay,
First, then, and then Tony.
I'm not saying mines are brilliant. They're just some old ones from a few years ago. How do you share screen again?
Down the bottom.
Yes, screen.
Oh yeah, big bright green thing. Oh God. Right.
And then screen.
And then
What's
Share.
this that's come up? Desktop. Is that right?
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just highlight one and then they'll all come up. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a Mac, isn't it? No idea.
Yeah, you need to select them all first, I think, and then
Yeah.
they'll run.
What do I need to do? Select them all?
Select them all.
Select the lot, and then it'll run as a show.
And then
Double
And
click
then
first
if you
one.
double click,
okay. Is that right?
Ben,
Yeah,
is that
that's
what
it.
you meant? Is that what we're supposed to say?
Aye, this was on holiday a couple of years ago. This was murals, the murals of Estepona
All right.
on the Costa del Sol. But when you're taking them, as you can see, there are cables and sometimes fences and things that it's difficult to get right into them. But they're really good if you're ever there.
Right, good.
See, like that one,
yeah,
fence in
Yeah.
front of it, but it just
oh yeah,
like a guy cutting the bushes, doesn't it? And
Yeah, that's
these ones, following on from Dean's presentation about cameras, we stumbled across this museum, and it was fascinating. It had this whole room with old cameras in it.
Well, that's just what I look like standing in the park.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, they're all behind glass, so you don't get the best shots to them. And we were
Yeah,
on a day
fabulous,
trip,
yeah.
so didn't have a lot of time to mess about there. I don't know what these would be old cine cameras, wouldn't they?
Mac Hunton.
This thing.
Yeah. Wow.
Oh, wow.
But it was some place. It was a place called Rhondda. What on earth is that? Does anyone know?
So it's
Telescope, maybe?
a telescope, isn't it?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah,
Weird, isn't it?
think
Looks
so.
like something you'd find in a mad scientist.
Yeah. It's got interchangeable eyepieces by the look of it.
Yeah.
Mm,
You just think it would work terribly as a telescope because you've got so many places where light can creep in
Yeah,
other than where
exactly.
you want it.
yeah. And you need a chair to stand on.
Or it's a microscope. And this
Yeah,
that
maybe.
light source there. Then this would be where you put the subject, and then you change.
Yeah.
Could be. Could be.
Could be
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, maybe because it
Yeah.
looks like it could be sort of the angle of it can be changed, doesn't it?
It could be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, that's it. It went very interesting. But if you're ever in the Costa del Sol, I'd recommend a visit.
Yeah. I'd love to go and see that place. Yeah.
That's it.
Stop share.
Cool. There you go.
All right, shall I have a go then?
Yeah, go on, Tony.
I normally get this wrong, don't I? So I need the screen. Share. No, get rid of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get rid of it. Okay, can you see those? You see anything?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. As you can see, I was just in the garden.
A lot of snow.
It's a lot of
Fix
colour,
it.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? Oh no, it's just not going to click on, is it? Hang on. I'm gonna
Yeah.
put this-
There we are.
Yeah, I've got it.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got it now.
Going to do this the hard way. I'll tell you, I won't show you all of them. I'll just do a couple. I quite like that one. The sun was shining. I liked it better. I just like the way the frost had settled on that.
Yeah.
Come on. It's just not, yeah, it's not going to move on. We'll move along a bit. I'll leave the squirrel out. And the other thing I quite liked was that, I tell you, I took a couple of I find that the colour is just so pleasant to see that now.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why this old computer is playing up. I'm going to have to get a shot of it. The crocuses, I think, are just delightful.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
And I took a slightly different view, which I thought, this is my favourite, actually. I just love the fact that they're sort of half open. It's a shame about that. I should have got rid of that, but I didn't notice it until I'd taken the picture. But I just think they look like little birds' mouths almost.
Are those out now?
Yeah, in the garden, yeah.
It's starting to go. We've got one or two coming out in the garden.
I've got one lonely snowdrop.
Do you know, we've not sown any of these in the garden. The garden is absolutely full of them.
Yeah.
And snowdrops. We just anyway. And I just took this because it's rather stark, but I quite like that. Just dead seed heads. Anyway, I was just out in the garden. So so that's that.
Ah, awesome. Anybody
My
else?
God, you are lying. That was not awesome.
It's nice just to get out with the camera sometimes.
Well,
Yeah.
I went out, actually, some of the, I did go out on a couple of days where it was snowy and I was trying to take the pictures of we had a squirrel in the garden. I was trying to do some pictures of that. And I ended up with ISO 10,000 because it was so dull and the thing wouldn't stay still. And so you can well imagine what the pictures are like. I mean, they're rubbish.
Okay, anyone else?
No.
No, the shaking is all right. So let's have a look then. Oh, we're still in here. Escape. Is it escape? Wrong button. Oh, second. Ah. Right. Taking its time. Okay, so I've been finishing off winter for my little thing for Henry Astor. So when it snowed, I was out typically early, taking things like that.
That's nice.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
Is that a panorama?
it is. Yeah, there might be one or two more. I can't remember what I put in it, but yeah, this pond is frozen. Top of it's frozen over. This was a really cold night. It's the next morning, and it was a really clear morning. You can see how beautiful. Sun's rising behind me.
God, if you get a game of curling on there.
Yeah, okay. You can go first, Ray. Well, that's it, please.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I like that.
Really good.
That's in the. You know where we parked our cars in the farmyard to go on our.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's in the hedge there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh,
Good. And I like how this kind of forms an eye. You know, this kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We've got a little sparrow in the front.
Badger. Yeah,
Sparrows.
pretty little birds, aren't they? Really?
Yeah. Look, there he is again. This is in Broome Wood. And this, believe it or not, is with the 100 to 400. It's the same day as those bird pictures. So I've gone out because I haven't got any birds in winter. So I went out especially to buy birds. And while I was there, a lady said to me, if you want some atmospheric pictures, there's some nice ones from the road in Broome Wood. And I said, oh, well, I can go in there. So I'll go and have a look. So I went in there with completely the wrong lens, of course, and took a few. But they came out all right. They're nice black and white.
Yeah, good like that.
It's on there.
Oh,
And I
that's
found
pretty.
one tree. This one tree was got fungus all over it, and so I took a few with the 100 to 400, and then I went back the next day with the macro lens and the ring flash, and that's what these are. So this is just growing out of the side of the tree, and that's like a little cluster of them, as close as I could get because they were just a little bit too high up. See, I like it in black and white, but opinions vary.
Yeah, I prefer the colour. I think.
I like the colour one there.
I
Yeah.
think the colour one's better. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do quite like that as well. But hey, and then yeah, while I was coming back from there to go and see Jane in their office, this red kite flew over. But I have problems with flying birds against the sky. I think it might be because the lens isn't long enough. You know, the 100 to 400 doesn't really reach far enough, and so you end up cropping the shot a bit more than you might want. You know, it's all not quite as good as you'd like, but a few pictures of it.
Yeah, they're pretty birds. Aren't they?
Is that cropped in from a bigger shot? Is that a wider shot?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. It's probably the best one. So you know, it's a bit big. It's maybe twice the size of this. It might be 50.
Yeah, getting it dead sharp is really difficult, isn't it?
It
Well,
is.
that's nice.
It is really
I like
hard.
that.
This is the night before that 5-degree frost and snow. That night, the night it's kind of completely changed, and it was all snowy the next morning. This is the night before. That's the pond again. You see, that's a panorama too. So it's the camera's like portrait style. You just go along.
Oh, I see.
That's at the top of the cart track when you go on this walk. And then one morning I got up and it was I knew it was going to snow, so I thought I'll go out in the snow. Oh my goodness me! How difficult is that? Taking one picture in the snow, that's okay, but if you want to take 30 or 40, yeah, it goes all everywhere. The camera was soaked. I had to keep wiping the lens. I couldn't see the back because it was all over the back. Oh my goodness, it was so hard. And I'd be clever and leave the lens cap off. The hood, the lens hood, leave that off and leave it at home to make it quicker to get it in and out of the bag. And of course, the lens hood stops the snow going on the lens.
It does. It does.
And half the time cleaning the front of the lens off. But this is someone's garden at the bottom of the close, and this is on the high street in a hedge. There's a tiny little window box a little bit further down the high street, getting towards the Baptist church, and this little flower was in there.
What is that? What kind of flower is that then?
I have no idea. Don't know. Anybody else know?
No, not
I
clue.
have no idea.
I've got Scooby. Had a few goes at these berries. So this is one morning when it was frost rather than snow. And they're really shiny, aren't they? They look like
They're very, very bright.
little toffee apples.
Yeah, they are.
And then there were a few, I waited for the sunlight. I was hoping to get a bit of dappled light on things. And it sort of worked, sort of didn't. Rush. And on the way back, there was a starling up there. What else have I done? Oh, that was the first snow. The first time it snowed. And that's up. These are the horse chestnut trees. And Broome Grange is over there. And the sunflower field either side of it. What else you got? Oh, there's a church lot. I think I took that on James's Drive. Drive just a little bit. And that's it. So I've finished winter now, so I'm having a rest.
Winter's over now. I reckon.
You wait till Sunday, mate.
That's just. It'll just be fresh, Ray. Come on. Think of your roots, man. You know what cold is.
Yeah.
Racing.
You don't get snow then, yeah.
It's so wet everywhere at the minute. You can't really go very far through the fields and things because it's just boggy all over the place.
Oh, the mud is just ridiculous. You know. I have to be a bit more choosy about where I take the dog. Just because I can't. I don't want to have to spend hours cleaning them when I get back.
Yeah. Okay, so that's it.
Well, thanks very much, Dean.
Yeah, thank you. That was good.
Thank you.
That was good.
Whose turn is it next week? Oh, you
It's
did it
me.
next time.
Oh, sorry, next week. No, it's me. Next month.
Next month. Sorry, next month. Yeah. That's
I
what
mean, so it's going to be a real thriller.
it will be.
I'm really looking forward to that.
The
Actually.
sky's the limit, Johnny. The sky's the limit.
You poor deluded fool, you.
He's just lowering expectations and he's going to deliver something amazing.
Yeah, I know.
No. I think you'll manage to be. You'll control yourselves. Don't worry.
Yeah, just to put you on the spot, I'm really looking forward to learning something there.
Look, you're talking about when I'm doing a talk on beginner astrophotography. Remember, it is a beginner that's giving it, so it won't go too far.
Can you stretch it over 2 months, Tony?
Sorry,
Can you stretch it over 2 months?
easily.
It's the old story, Tony. In the country of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
See you guys.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks
Okay.
very much.
Thank you very much.
Nice to see you.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
All right.